The supply side of the market may be the side of the market that you are less familiar with. It represents what sellers intend to do in a market, right? So we're thinking about selling goods and services. To an economist, the term supply means something very specific. It is, again, a relationship. So it's describing how two variables move. Those two variables are price and quantity supplied. This time when we think about price, we're thinking about the price that sellers receive from a transaction. So you sell a car for $400, you have that car and give it up in exchange for $400 from a buyer. That price is the money involved in that transaction. Quantity supplied has a parallel concept with the demand concept of quantity demanded. We are counting up. But here, what we're counting up is the number of units that sellers intend to put out into the market at a given price. We can graph out this story, this direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. We're labeling price on the vertical and quantity on the horizontal. If it is a direct relationship between these two variables, that means that they move in the same direction, and so my line, my supply curve, would be upward sloping, right? We say that it's upward sloping because we can take two different points on that supply curve. That's one combination of price and quantity supplied. Here's another combination of price and quantity supplied. And what we see is that when prices increase, quantity supplied also increases. We see that when prices go up, the number of units that sellers want to put out into the market is going to go up. If you're running a business at a given price, maximizing profit given your cost structure, and you're putting out this many units, gosh, suddenly if something happens and the price that you can command in the market goes up, if you can get a higher price, you're going to try to ramp up production and capitalize on that. Increase price, increase quantity supplied. Or we can tell the story going the other direction. If prices were to fall for your product, it may be that some of those units that you were producing are now no longer economically viable and you cut back production. When prices fall, you decrease your quantity supplied to the market. Again, direct relationship. So to summarize, we've got two variables that measure things. Prices are the price involved in transaction, the dollars that are exchanged. Quantity supplied, that's counting up the number of units. And the term supply, whenever we use the term supply, we're referring to this line here, which is composed of a number of different combinations of price and quantity supplied. There is a direct relationship between those two variables. Similar to the demand story, we can think about supply in two ways. We can think about individual supply, and we can think about market supply. With individual supply, it's best to think about an individual business. Their individual supply tells us for a given price how many units they want to sell to the market. Well, if we've got a bunch of firms and they're all operating in the same market, then what we could do is we could aggregate or add up all of their individual supplies, and what we'd be left with is the market supply. From here on out, when we refer to supply, we're referring to the market supply. That is, for all producers in the market, for a given price, how many units they would want to produce for that market. This supply curve, and we just went through it, tells me one piece of information. For a given price, the supply curve is going to tell me, for all producers in the market, what's the total number of units that they would want to produce for the market. Where does that information come from? Another piece of information, another relationship that's built into the supply curve has to do with quantity and cost. This supply curve tells me, for different quantities, the cost of producing those given units. We can think about, to produce a certain unit, the only way that you would produce that unit and bring it to market is if you could command a price that justified the cost of producing it, right? So we can think about when prices go up, all of these units that used to be too costly to produce now become economically viable. There's where my direct relationship between price and quantity supplied comes from. Price represents the benefits to producers of producing their goods and bringing them to market. Whenever the price, that is the benefit, is greater than the cost, bring those units to market. The supply curve contains information on cost. And lastly, we can also tell a story about and to draw a market supply with an equation, we can posit this hypothetical supply equation. It's in a familiar y equals mx plus b format, where we've got price being measured vertically and quantity being measured horizontally. We know it's an upward sloping straight line because we have a positive constant coefficient on my slope. And so again, we can ask the vertical and the horizontal intercept, where do they come from? This vertical intercept represents, right, when we're measuring quantity on my horizontal axis, when it takes on a value of 0, what's the value of price? That is to say, we're asking when price is equal to 0, what's the value of when quantity is equal to 0, what's the value of price? Algebraically, we can just insert this question into this model. When quantity takes on a value of 0, solving for p, we get p, according to the model, equals 10. That's why my vertical intercept is at 10. Is there a horizontal intercept with this model? There is, right? Our horizontal intercept flips the question on its head. It asks, what is the value of Q when price is equal to 0? Again, we can take this question into my model. If I set price equal to 0, and then I solve for Q, what I'm left with is Q equals negative 50, which actually makes sense, right? If we think about this model, this straight line, it does actually have a horizontal intercept. It's just it's over here in this quadrant over here, and represents negative Q, which doesn't have a good real-world interpretation, but certainly mathematically we can come up with that value. And lastly, to re-emphasize this terminology, what happens to the supply for oranges when the price of oranges increases? Nothing. Nothing happens to the supply. Let's jump back to this, right? The supply is this line. Supply is the entire upward sloping line. That line is made up of a bunch of different points, and each of those points has a price and a value of quantity supplied with it. If prices go up, does that line move? No. When prices go up, what happens is we move to a different point on that line. When prices go up, quantity supplied goes up. But what happens to supply